Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Jez FM. Today we have another Author Corner, which is where our resident author and director of learning, Danette and Shivani, chats with a fellow author, and this time it is Shivani Gupta about her book, Getting Your People to Step Up. Shivani is an award-winning entrepreneur, speaker, coach, and author, and is obsessed with passion, people, and performance. It's an amazing conversation, and I think Danette and Shivani have some really good conversational chemistry. So this conversation just flows really naturally and they both have a really good time. I learned so much about it, how to create a positive work environment, attracting passionate people. It's all really important stuff. So enjoy this Author Corner. We love bringing these to you and I hope you enjoy them as much as we do. As always, have a magical week.
Hello and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. As you can see, today we have a guest and I will get to our guest very, very shortly. Just wanted to say that this is one of our podcasts where we are focusing on a particular book that's been released, and I'm really, really excited today to have Shivani Gupta, and we're going to be talking about her book, Getting Your People to Step Up. Amazing book. Everyone knows I love books, Shivani. So, and I love where they're really practical and there's some fabulous practical examples. And I love the coaching that you've got at the end with the questions in each chapter and your summary and all that. So it just, for me, I was like, oh, I love reading this book. So let's first start with you, Shivani. Would you like to introduce yourself and let our viewers and our listeners know a little bit more about you before we get to the book?
Absolutely, Danette. Thank you. And it's lovely to be on here with another fellow author and a podcast host. So thank you for having me on. Well, a little bit about me. I say that I've had this life of 3 E's. I started my career as an engineer and then became an entrepreneur and have run several businesses and have now moved into education of for business leaders and owners. And really the book was a combination of all those lessons I'd learned and also some of the hard things I'd learned. And put that into the book. In terms of me personally, I grew up in India. So I was 11 years of age when my family decided to move from India to Australia. It was quite a challenging time growing up in rural South Australia.
Wow.
With about 30,000 people after coming from a big city.
Yes.
And I loved growing up in the country. I've lived in lots of different regions and now been based in Brisbane, Australia for the last few years. I'm married. I've been with Scott now for almost 20 years, and we have 2 teenage kids, which probably needs a whole book in itself, doesn't it? Like
Totally.
I'm constantly reading books about parenting. And so that's kind of me in a nutshell in terms of my personal life and my business life. I've exited a number of businesses last year and now purely focusing on education, business leaders and owners.
Oh, I love that. Other than the engineer part, we've had very similar. I am an entrepreneur, still love doing that and love the whole education side. So I'm an accountant by trade. Don't say anything. Don't say anything. No, accountants are good people. Love accountants. So tell us a little bit about your book and what inspired you. And I'll hold that book up so everyone can see who's watching on video.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, one of the things, I've been in business for 22 years now, and whether I was running a business with my coaching and speaking and had a few staff member or one of the business I ended up with almost 60 staff, I found this notion of people really challenging. I'd read a lot of different books about it. As humans, we're pretty complex beings. Yes. And particularly I was very interested in, how to actually retain really great talent. So how do we keep the high performers? And then obviously since COVID, one of the big issues that any particular business leader or entrepreneur that I'm speaking to is constantly talking about how they can't attract the right people. And so, when I talk about this book, Danette, one of the things is, I've made a lot of mistakes as well. It's not about, here's a, step-by-step thing of all the things that I've got right. I've made a lot of mistakes in my corporate role. I've made a lot of mistakes in my hiring of businesses. So I wanted to share not only the things I'd learned, I've got some interviews there with other small to medium business owners. I've got some examples in there from bigger companies, because I think often as business leaders and owners, we can still emulate. We don't have to have 50,000 people in our company, but we can learn how to emulate what they do and then translate that into what's relevant for our business. And So it's a combination of taking things that worked really well. It's a combination of things that didn't take really well. But I really wrote it for that business leader and owner that is finding managing people challenging. And they want to find, people that are great. And how do we test for that? How do we attract the right people? But then how do we retain the high performers? So the book's separated into two parts. There's the first 3 chapters are about attracting the right people, and the next 4 chapters are about retention. And hopefully the models and strategies that I share, we've deliberately used the word simple because I wanted a book, as you very kindly said, that when people read that chapter, they can go, great, I can actually literally take that model or that framework and I'm going to start using it in my book or in my strategy or with my people. So I wanted to be super practical because they're the books that I find really useful, and I wanted that hopefully as a bit of a resource guide and a book for people that read it.
Well, you definitely achieved that, and I have to say the learnings from the failures, that shows that a lot of people go, oh, well, I don't want to fail, and it's like, well, that's part. If you're an entrepreneur, you're going to fail, and if you can learn from them, then that just makes you stronger, and which is why you've been had businesses, etc., for 20 odd years, because you can't do that without a bit of failure from time to time. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're not so big. So I love that.
Absolutely. And I remember somebody saying to me, and I'm not sure if the statistic is exactly true, but they said that entrepreneurs will fail between 8 or 9 out of 10 things.
Yep.
And unless we are prepared to learn how to fail and learn from them and obviously not keep repeating the mistakes, then one of the great things that happens is that's when we hit the gold, when we've got to that 9th or that 10th thing. And that really helped me because there's some, and I talk about this in the book, there were a couple of monumental failures that were very expensive.
Yes.
As an entrepreneur, in the business, as I call that entrepreneur and for business leaders, but also as that entrepreneur. And I've made some pretty big boo-boos in terms of buying and exiting businesses, and they were very expensive lessons.
Yep. Do you know Robin Sharma, who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari?
Yeah, I was actually on a webinar with him about 3 weeks ago,
Oh,
and it was outstanding. And I've signed up for his weekly subscription. He is
nice.
fabulous. I just love the way he just cuts to things really,
Yes.
really quickly.
Yep.
He and James Clear, who wrote
Atomic Habits.
Atomic Habits, they're
Yep.
2 people that I follow weekly in terms of some of the wisdom that they impart. So it sounds like we're reading the same things.
Same. And why I asked you that is many years ago, I was in a room with Robin and 10 entrepreneurs from across the world. And Robin asked the question, hands up if you were an overnight success in 10 years. No hands went up. 15 years, one hand went up, and his dad had started the business. 20 years, a few more. 25 was when they all started, like everyone's hand went up. And it was that, exactly as you say, we've got to fail a few times before we get to that, this is the way to move forward. So I love that. And yeah, totally love both of those and follow them both weekly as well.
Wow. Yeah, well, that's great because I'm 22 years in. So, maybe another 3 years I might finally get some lessons.
I love it. So let's now go to a couple of elements from your book. And what you were just talking about before was really important. So I thought we'd start with, when we're looking to attract people, how do you identify the people who are motivated, who are passionate, that might be a good fit with your organisation?
Yeah, I found that, the people that were really, really passionate, where we can identify them as business leaders and owners very quickly, are the ones we go, wow, we want to not only retain them, but how do I replicate them? How do I copy and paste them and, clone them in our businesses? And the question that I started to wonder was, what if we could identify them up early in the interview process? So what about if we could actually really start to test for that? One of the things that we're really good at testing for is skills. And also in the last few years, we've got really good at testing for behaviors and having interviews that test for behaviors. But how do we actually test for passion? Is it something that comes in later? So over the years, Danette, I've developed the passion model, and the passion model really looks at the fact that, even though we might call them different things, that there are essentially 7 areas of passion. And what if we could very simply ask people to rate what their top passions were? And I've now tested this across hundreds of thousands of people in my speaking and coaching, as well as other people. And, I found a number of things to be true. One was that when you say to people, particularly in an interview, that I'm not expecting work to be your number one passion. I just want to know, how do you spend your time and energy?
Love
And
that.
we literally give them a minute or so to rate it in an interview. And as long as, for me as a business owner and leader, as long as it's in the top three, work does not need to be the number one passion for people. And so, for example, I remember interviewing this fabulous woman to be a leader in one of my businesses. And when I interviewed her, she talked about the fact that her health and her body was really, really important to her. And she took time out every day and made sure that she exercised. She was one of those people that set herself goals around running half marathons and marathons, and going to the gym was really important. And in this case, I was running a small business with about 50 staff. And so I was able to, as part of not only when I hired her, but part of also building that passion of hers around health and body as an incentive.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people go, well, we'll just give them vouchers, or at Christmas time, let's just give them a ham, or whatever it is that we're actually wanting to give to people. But imagine, not only could we hire people based on their passions, but we could also incentivize them. Now, we don't have to spend any more money than we would on the other person, but if we can tailor that a little bit, so that we've got people that are really responding to that, that is a great way to, I believe, engage high performance. So this model really looks at asking them to rate themselves and really asking them some questions around that. And, as business leaders and owners, we're fairly intuitive people. And so when you're working in any type of leadership, and really trusting that gut and going, okay, this person has an amazing CV, but I noticed that when they did this passion part, it didn't really come across for me that they're very passionate about their work.
Yep.
Or, you know what, I think that could be a really great fit for us based on the way that they answered that and what they did. And again, it's not something a lot of people expect, and we only give them a minute or two to do that.
Yes.
And I say to them, look, we want to know your gut feel. Passion's about heart, passion's
Yes.
about gut. So I'm only going to give you 1 or 2 minutes just to rate, where do you spend your time and energy? Tell us about how you spend your time and energy, rather than tell us about yourself. And a lot of things, I believe, can be revealed in that part when we're going through that interview process. So if we can add a couple of extra questions into that process and really look and gauge people a bit differently, that could prevent us from not hiring the right person, hiring a person that's dispassionate,
Yes.
which then become a really big issue in our businesses longer term.
Yep. Oh, I love that. Oh, we'll talk more about that. Okay, so my next one is, let's assume we've hired, they fit around the passion answers and stuff. How do we go about creating that positive work environment, and particularly with a culture of diversity and inclusion? Because I know in my book, like, that's so important that we bring in that diversity and inclusion for things like collaboration, problem solving, etc. But I'm really interested in, what are some of the things you've found that work really well in this area?
Yeah, well, for me, having grown up in a different country and moving to Australia, it was the first time probably for me personally, I realised that I had brown skin and I looked different to everybody else in my class.
Yep.
And I remember standing in front of the mirror
Yes.
and trying to put like white powder on my skin. I remember trying to stand in front of the mirror and trying to speak in an Australian accent. I spoke really good English, but I had this quite heavy Indian accent. And I just remember as an 11-year-old, almost 12-year-old, just wanting to fit in. And so, in the book, I talk about and I share that particular story. But, I've called that particular chapter The Best of Both Worlds, because as I grew older, I realized that, why would I want to just be an Australian or just an Indian?
Yep.
Like, why wouldn't I want the best of both worlds in my life? And as I've got older, I've started to embrace a lot more of my culture, celebrate a lot more of it, and really make that part of my life. And so the chapter around diversity, I think as business leaders and owners, it's important that it doesn't matter, diversity, a lot of people talk about gender, but diversity is bigger than that. Diversity is diversity in age, it's ethnicity, it's, sexual orientation, it's What we want is, we don't want this thing, what I call groupthink, where everybody thinks the same. And yes, gender is part of diversity as well. And when we hire people, irrespective of which country they were born in, which orientation they're born with, what age they are, if we can bring people who think differently into the businesses, a lot of the research is now showing there are direct results on your bottom line. And so not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also a business move. It's an absolute strategy that I believe business leaders and owners need to be able to implement in their business. And how do we actually do that? So there are many, many ways to do that. Sometimes even knowing the different types of diversity that you have in your team, celebrating some of the cultural traditions that might exist in your team. If you've got people that have got different religious beliefs, having an area that might be dedicated to a prayer room. I know in some of my businesses, because I'm such a foodie, when I've had a really diverse team, which I try and work with, is to have people one day a week where they brought some dishes to share and we all would share a meal, and there was no pressure. You didn't have to spend hours cooking, or you could just grab some cheese and crackers, from the cupboard and the fridge if you wanted to. But the idea was to bring people through food, which was something that I'd grown up very strongly and still do to this day in my culture. And so, getting people to bring the best of both worlds, even if they've just got that diversity from working in different businesses, getting them to bring that experience into that, learning about what was great about their previous culture, learning about how they could bring that in, and meshing and melding them in a big melting pot, I think is such a great way for us to lead people.
I love it. And Shivani, I once got a job because I said I was the afternoon tea queen. And they had two groups that didn't talk to one another, and it worked, totally worked. So I love the food side as well.
Yeah. There's another commonality.
Exactly.
I'm constantly obsessed about food. Like, I was speaking to my husband and he goes, do you remember when we went there? And I went, was that the one that had that cafe where we had, that soup with truffle oil? He's like, oh my goodness. Like, I can't believe you can remember. I said, I will not remember places, but I will remember food experiences.
Yep.
And then my memory file just opens up completely. So
love it. Love it. We are so similar. So my next question is, one of the really important things, and I deal a lot with people who aren't necessarily really good at being straightforward and don't like conflict. And yet, in order for people to improve, they need feedback from their managers, their leaders. So I'd love to sort of understand some ways that we can help managers and potentially even leaders provide more effective feedback so that people can continue to grow and thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And, all the research says that the number one reason that people leave their roles is because of their direct relationship with their manager. Yeah. Every piece of research across countries, across sizes of business. So when we look at that stat and we look at that data from a business leader and owner perspective, the question we've got to ask is, how do I avoid my high performers particularly leaving because of their direct relationship with their manager? And I believe that one of the best ways we can get our managers to become great communicators is to really teach them coaching skills. So I talk about that in the book. I've got a whole chapter dedicated to it, because I believe that it's great to have some external, coaching support. I do quite a bit of external coaching, but it's also so important to build in coaching in your workplaces. Yes. To teach your managers the skills of being able to coach. And I believe that managers they wear lots of different hats. So, sometimes they're wearing a trainer hat and showing people how to do things and learning how to do things. Sometimes they're wearing a facilitator's hat. Sometimes they're, working through a lot of logistics. But if we could teach them also to have a coaching hat on, where we're really teaching them and they're teaching their people how to fish and not fish for them. So, for example, they're not giving them the answers all the time. And if they could learn the skills and learn a couple of really simple frameworks and models that they can apply that, I believe that the more percentage of time a manager spends coaching, I believe has a direct correlation in terms of the engagement of that particular employee and the retention of that employee as a result of that. Managers becoming coaches, spending more time coaching. And I always say, whatever role you're playing, whether you're working as a trainer, as a manager hat, and different roles that you might be playing, keep coming back to the coaching, keep asking them the questions that will help them file the answers, make them, self-sustainable, make them that they can survive without you. and it's a great retention strategy. So I spend quite a bit of time talking about that because I've seen that work, over and over. And I look at my own life where I've had great managers who, were great coaches. They're the ones I loved working with, because even when that opportunity came for feedback, as your question talked about, most people, when they go feedback, there's such a negative, we coil up because we think, oh my goodness, what have I done wrong?
Yes.
I don't want to get this feedback. But when we can establish that's a rapport with our manager, then, and our leaders in the businesses, they're the best ones to work with because they're constantly giving us great feedback. They're telling us things we've done right. And when the opportunity comes, the way that they're able to communicate with us and coach us, then we learn from them in terms of what we could improve. And we're very open to that rather than completely shut off from this notion of feedback. And I work with lots of businesses where they go, we want to do some feedback training. And I go, I wouldn't call it that, right? Let's even just take that name away in terms of feedback. Let's really talk about how to get some of your managers and leaders becoming coaches. And then let's build in feedback as one of the skill sets that that manager and leader needs. And then we start to change the way that we manage people and engage them differently.
Love that. Love that answer. And we all can benefit from becoming coaches in terms of whether you're inside an organization or external. It helps everyone because we're asking great questions, which is always fabulous.
Yeah, working on all my coaching skills with my 2 teenagers at the moment, Danette, and that is always fun. And a couple of times my son will go, I know that you're coaching me, Mum. I know that you've got your coaching model. And I'm like, oh no, I am. I'm trying not to give the answers as you enter towards adulthood. One's only a couple of years away, one 4 years away. I'm like trying to, and they're just hilarious. They're like, I know that you're coaching me, Mum. I'm like, yeah, I know.
And it's with the best intentions, isn't it, Shivani? Right. I've never done that too. So we're nearly at the end of this fabulous conversation. I'm curious, is there any resources that you'd point people towards? Obviously, and I'll hold your book up again, obviously reading your book. You also have a podcast, so tell us about that too. And any other resources you think might be helpful for people who are running businesses, looking to both attract and retain really good people.
Look, thank you for that, Danette. At the back of the book, there is a QR code that when you go to that, there'll be a bunch of interviews with people. There'll be some free downloadables so that you can actually access that. The intention of the book is really to help you as a business leader and owner get less stress and have some different strategies, even if you only take 1 or 2 things out of the book and you implement them in your business. That would make my heart sing to be able to do that. The other resources, my website is called askshivani.com, and under resources, I have a resources tab. There's a bunch of podcasts in there. The podcast is called Grow Your Business. The idea is that, your business grows, and obviously does that through the 3 areas that I spend a lot of time obsessing about, which is people, passion, and performance. And there are some great people that I've interviewed there. I've got people like Hector Garcia, who's the author of Ikigai, co-author of Ikigai. I have John Buchanan, who led the Australian cricket team into some amazing wins. So there's some amazing people in there that talk about mindset and people and growth and things in terms of how you grow your business. There's also blogs and there's a number of other free resources. But if you've got any questions, just please go through the contact form and I'll be able to point you in the right direction if I can. That might help you as well.
Nice. And we'll make sure that all those links are included in the both the audio and the video links that we'll have with this.
Thank you so much.
Now, Shivani, is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up for today?
I think the thing I'd love to be able to sort of finish off with is that people are complex. And, one of the things that I speak a lot about is that it's so important as business leaders and owners and to the people that are listening to this particular podcast and follow you and your work, that we need to keep learning and evolving and growing. So hopefully this is just one of the books that you will read around your development and your learning. And, I'm an avid reader. I try and inhale a lot of books in a year. I probably buy more than I can read, but just keep learning and growing, whether it's about people, whether it's about your business, whether it's other skill sets that you believe you've got some gaps in. So I'm just very grateful to being on this podcast and taking my work out. I really appreciate being on here too. And thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, Shivani. And I'll just put that book up again, Getting Your People to Step Up. And again, we'll put a link to that as well. It's a fabulous book, very, very practical, which I love. Shivani, I reckon we're sisters from different mothers because we are so similar. So for everyone who's been listening and watching, we thank you so much. And as always, have a magical week. And thank you so much, Shivani, for being on our podcast.
Pleasure.